When it comes to startups, your idea is not the most important thing as a founder. I know it's a little contrary to some of the things you might be hearing, especially from us advisors, in terms of defining the idea, problem, solution, making it clear. I get it. You might have heard it 1,000 times, but your idea actually is not that important. So what is? In this video, I'm going to break down how your idea translates to your startup, especially when it comes to what an investor is thinking. And we're going to talk about all the different factors that come into play and how you should be approaching your idea and how to present to investors and making sure you can do your part to ensure that you get that investment. Let's jump into it. So if it's not the idea, what is it? You might have heard, is it the tech? Are you building something that's completely unique? That's a 10x or one order of magnitude better than what's out there? Not really. Is it the TAM? Do you need to be in a $1 billion TAM? Does the market have to be big enough? Yes, but the reason investors, and we want you to think about your TAM, is for other factors. Saying you have a $1 billion TAM is not enough. It's important, and it will determine whether an investor thinks that you're going to go unicorn or not, but it's not the final thing, not the most important thing. Then is it the team? Do you need to have the domain expertise and all that good stuff? Do you need to be an expert in your industry? Do you need to be relevant? Do you have to have founder problem fit, as some people call it? Yes, but it's not the most important thing. And I'm going to explain to you that when I'm looking at startups and I'm thinking about from an advisory perspective or as a general partner to figure out whether to send this startup to the investment committee, here is what I'm looking at. And I've developed this little quadrant model to explain to you and give you a little bit of insight and some guidance. Let me start off by saying that this is my model. There are so many different ways that investors and advisors and associates, analysts, scouts look at startups that are out there. I've broken it down to try and help you determine what's the approach, where should I focus, to determine whether or not your startup really is fundable, it's investable, and you're going to get those investors' attention. Let's talk about entry. This, in fact, is the most important thing to me, and I know for many other investors and other people out there, when it comes to looking at a startup. Entry is all about how are we going to enter into the market? How fast is something going to be adopted? How easy will it be for adoption out there? You might have a problem or an idea that's so obscure, it may be life-changing. It may change the world, but nobody's going to understand. Nobody's going to want the solution. And that's the reason we talk about when you have an idea and you're putting it out there, is it one of those, I have my hair on fire ideas where users are running to you and saying, thank you so much for solving my problem. It's one thing to have a need for a solution. It's another thing to have a compelling need. And these are the factors we look at. Now, don't get me wrong. You might be working on something that, again, like I said, is a complete game changer. It just smashes everything, disrupts entire industries, changes the way people think, is a paradigm shifting innovation. I get it, but investors are in the business of making money, and how long they're willing to wait, well, that's actually getting a little shorter and shorter in terms of the signals that they need to see to know that you are the right a team, the right startup, the right founder to bet on as far as a financial return, because that's what investors do. They want to make money. So it doesn't matter how great your idea is, they're thinking about entry. And let me break down how it works. You can have easy entry, easy to get in the market, easy to get people's attention, all those things. And it might be one of those problems or an idea that everybody knows they have. They've been looking for a solution. Or it might be super hard. It might be a lot of resistance in terms of adoption. People might be skeptical. They might not be used to what you're saying to the point where they're going to actually resist what you have to offer. They may say, yeah, it's a great idea, but we don't want to change. There's all these different factors that come into play because maybe they're entrenched in another solution. They're just so used to it. They're sucked in. It's kind of like me. I keep thinking to myself, maybe I should change my phone to an Android device because it's a lot more flexible and different things like that, more options out there. But I'm in the Apple ecosystem. It's super hard to get me out, to get me to change my behavior. Not to mention, I buy my iPhone super, super late. So it's not like you're going to get me razzled and dazzled and changing my behavior because you got some new device. So it's hard to get me to shift. And there are entire markets, entrenched, calcified markets, institutions, academia, government, the financial industry that do not want to change relative to how fast tech is willing to change. So then let's look at the idea. Now we're going to correlate entry to idea. And here's how I break down the ideas. I put ideas in a 1 or 2 camps. If they don't fall into one or the other of these camps, then I go, we're in the mediocre middle. It's kind of vanilla, not interested. Your idea is either going to be smart and sensible. These are ideas where I go, wow, that's really smart. I can't believe I didn't think about that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's this light bulb moment, this aha. Sometimes founders just say, yeah, this is the way that we're approaching it a little different. I go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So smart and sensible. And then there's the crazy, courageous idea. There are those ideas that founders tells me, I go, yeah, that's crazy. That's nuts. It's going to take a lot of courage. I dig it. All right. I'm not writing off crazy and courageous ideas. I've done that in the past and I made a big mistake thinking to myself, oh gosh, I've looked at certain types of investment. I go, yeah, that's a crazy idea, but yeah, I'm not in. It's a little too crazy for me, and I've regretted it. So I've learned to be open to crazy and courageous ideas, especially if they come from crazy and courageous founders. So let's look at the 4 quadrants. So imagine you have a smart and sensible idea, and it's easy to enter the market. This is what's going through my head, and this is what should be going through your head. What's the competition like? If it's smart and sensible, everybody knows it's smart and sensible, and it's easy to get in the market. Well, the competition is probably going to be super stiff. And so I'm going to be drilling you and asking you, while everybody else is selling this and everybody else thinks it's a great idea, how are you going to compete? How are you going to cut through the noise and get your share, a bigger share than other people are getting? So if it's smart and sensible, it's kind of like those business ideas where people say, start this business for $1 or $100, or start it in your bedroom, working from home. Well, that's smart and sensible, right? And if it's easy to do it, everybody's going to be doing it. And therefore, that's a little scary to me as an investor, because we're probably going to be throwing a ton of money into this black hole to try and compete. And it's not a good idea. There's just so much noise. So you're going to have to show me how you're going to get around competition. The next is, if it's smart and sensible, but it's hard to get in the market, I want to know why. I want the insights. What insights do you have as to the reason it's been hard? If this is so smart and sensible, everyone's sitting around going, why didn't I think of that? Then why is it so hard? Is there something to do with changing the behavior, or what's the factor that we're not looking at? I'm expecting you as a founder to kind of have the answer. So it's hard to enter the market, even though it's a smart, sensible idea. I want to know why. You better come with some insights and explain to me the reason. Now let's move over to the crazy and courageous. And like I said, I don't write off smart, sensible ideas, and I don't write off crazy, courageous ideas. I don't write off any ideas in these 4 quadrants here. What I want to know is, what are you bringing to the table to help me de-risk that investment? And I'm going to advise you the same way when you're pitching to other investors. So back to crazy and courageous idea. If it's easy in the market, well, then I want to know velocity. How fast can we get there? Because crazy and courageous, and it's easy to get in the market, it's going to take off. Maybe it goes viral. All of a sudden, everybody else is going to want to do it, and they're going to jump into it. And therefore, I'm going to know how fast can you go dominate? Is there a first mover advantage? What do we need to do to make sure that we lock you in so that there's probably brand recognition? You've kind of built that moat, those competitive barriers of entry, because you've gone so fast and you've got everybody in there because copycats are going to come, right? It's the same thing. It just seemed like so many startups get out there and then you see all these clones start to happen. Once everybody says, that's not going to work, that's not a good idea, it's kind of like crypto, right? Suddenly everybody could have access to blockchain. It was easy to start programming and what have you. And then all of a sudden you see this explosion. NFTs are the same way. Well, what's your first mover advantage? Because, you look at some of these NFT projects, or you look at the blockchain technology, suddenly someone's coming out with a competitor and maybe they've got deeper pockets and it's easy for them to get in the game, especially accelerated by money. And now you've lost that velocity. So that's what I want to know. How are you going to get velocity and how are you going to maintain it, or how are you going to entrench yourself? Now you're going to notice that these squares kind of lead to each other, which I'll explain in a moment. So then there's crazy courageous. And if it's hard idea, well, then I want to know what your team knows, what your team can do. How will your team execute? Do you have the domain expertise? Do you have that magic, that it factor that founders need to have to tackle a crazy courageous idea of a really hard problem that's going to be super hard to get people to see, right? Not writing you off, but guess what? All this stuff is going to take money. If there's a lot of competition, we're going to throw a lot of money at it. If there's insights, what's the money that we're going to have to throw at it? If you need velocity, we're going to have to throw a lot of money at it, right? If it's about the team, well, I want to make sure that we're throwing money at the right team that can challenge this really hard to enter market as far as your problem solution, your idea is concerned. So then I'm looking at, okay, you notice how you can see this relate. So let's start off here with the crazy, courageous idea. If you're talking about velocity, well, then that's what I'm thinking is how fast do we have to go? Because eventually it's going to become a smart, sensible idea. Other competitors are going to enter. So how are we dealing with the competition? If you have a smart, sensible idea and it's easy in competition, well, then I want the unique insights. I want to make it hard for the competitors to get in there. So we better get some unique insights and we better start to, create that moat, that defensible moat around you, create barriers of entry. So what insights can we do? If it's smart, sensible idea and you've got insights, well, then I want to know, can you build that team? And is this team going to expand into the crazy and courageous? Got the insights. We got to start building that team. And then once again, what team can you bring in to build that velocity? So that's how it works. So these are all interconnected. So it's not like you can just focus on one. You're going to have to think about all things: competition, insights, team, velocity. But where you start is going to depend. And this is where it all boils down. Entry is important, but you know how I measure whether you're going to work out one of these 4 quadrants or not? Well, it comes down to traction, right? Traction is the proof. Have you shown the traction out there? If it's a super competitive market, have you shown that you can cut through the noise and you're beating out the competitors? If it's a super hard market, you got some insights. How have you proven it? I don't need to see a ton of revenue. You don't have to be profitable, but you need to show me that your insights are validated by the market somehow. If you got the right team, well, what traction has your team shown in the past? What have you been able to execute together in the past? It's not just enough to know something, but have you built something together? What traction have you shown? And then if you have a crazy, courageous idea and your velocity, well, obviously that's traction right there, right? So then what else do I look at? Well, I look at traction, right? So then I may say, you know what? Come back. When you hear you're too early, they're saying that you haven't shown enough traction or you haven't shown enough to de-risk one of these 4 quadrants for us, or maybe all the quadrants. So traction is the way that you address it. Come back after you've shown some traction. I don't care what it is. Tell me you have 1,000 people sign up and pre-ordered. Tell me that you got one big company sign a letter of intent. Tell me that you've talked to, 5 of your companies that could be using it and they've agreed to your pricing. Traction doesn't necessarily mean revenue. It would really help, but might be the first paying customer. Maybe I'm sitting there saying to myself, I don't know if people are actually going to pay for this. It makes a lot of sense, right? It's a smart, sensible solution, but everyone's going to want it, but they're going to want to use it for free because it's offered for free everywhere else because it's super competitive. How is someone going to pay for it? How are you going to convince someone to pay for it? Come back to me when you got your first paying customer and tell me what you came up with, right? And then when in doubt, if you're like, I don't know what to do and where to get some traction. All right. Maybe you're starting to see a little theme here. Traction, traction, traction. Pick one of these things and start to say, how can we get traction? Even just a little bit. That's what an MVP is. How can we build something with the minimum amount of resources, the minimal amount of user experience to get out there and to validate or invalidate our assumptions? Because that's what startups are. When you're pitching a startup and you say, okay, and a lot of people think that I'm accusing founders of being presumptuous. I'm not. When I say you're making a very large assumption that people want your solution and are going to pay X amount of dollars for it. And a lot of founders kind of shrink back. You should be saying, yes, I am making that assumption. But when I say that, what I'm doing is I'm putting that assumption on the table and I'm asking, what can we do to validate or invalidate that assumption? Because that assumption is a risk for the investor. And so the more traction that you can get, the more you will de-risk that factor in the mind of the investor. All right. So let's summarize here. Ideas, they are the starting point, but they are not the most important thing. It's a correlation of idea to entry, because you can have the best idea in the world and you can have the best software in the world, but if nobody's lining up to pay you for it, well, then you're going to go into obscurity, right? I can give you lots of examples of the startups in our portfolio that we look at, and we look at these quadrants, and I go, these are the challenges that I'm going to be facing. So you take your idea and you say, okay, is it a smart, sensible idea? Is it crazy, courageous? Is it going to be easy or hard to enter into the marketplace? And do your research. And the 4 things that you're going to be thinking about, while it's smart and sensible and it's easy to enter, what's the competition going to be like? How am I going to address competition? And then if it's a smart, sensible idea, but it's hard, you're going to have to say, why? Why? Where's the friction point? What's been going on there that nobody's just running to do this? What's the issue? If you have crazy, courageous idea, it's easy to enter in the marketplace. You're going to be thinking about, how fast do I have to move? What's the velocity? Crazy, courageous idea, and it's hard to enter the market, while you're going to be thinking about the team. Do we have the domain expertise? Do we have that it factor to really punch through and execute? Are we giving our investors a lot of confidence when it comes to our team? And you might have to be thinking through, who do we need to bring on? This is where, if you got a crazy, courageous idea, but it's super hard and you need to build some software for it, or you need some scientific expertise and all that stuff, well, advisors, co-founders, investors are going to want to know how you're going to de-risk that. So if you're building something technological and you're using a dev shop, well, that's a big risk. So how are you going to de-risk that, right? So those are all the factors. Think about it from 4 quadrants. So there you have it. That's how I would encourage you to analyze your startup idea, figure out how you're going to talk to investors, what type of traction that you need to get out there and raise that money, get out there and start making some money, right? Hope this was helpful. As always, startups.com, community-based online accelerator, founders accelerating other founders. Come join me there as the lead advisor. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comments. I always appreciate the feedback. And once again, thanks for checking this out. See you in the next video.